Introduction: the journey within. It's late in the evening, but you can't escape the noise. The hum of the traffic outside your window, the constant ping of your phone, the soft murmur of the TV in the background. Everywhere you look, there's something pulling at you. People need your attention. Tasks need to be completed. Conversations demand your focus. The world around you is loud, relentless. And somewhere beneath all that noise, you can feel something. Something that's been buried, something you've ignored for too long. You're exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. You've spent so much time trying to meet the expectations of others, trying to keep up with the pace of life, that you've lost sight of who you really are. You've been surrounded by people, yet somehow you've never felt more alone. Your mind is cluttered, your heart is heavy, and your soul feels distant, like it's fading into the background of everything else. You glance at your reflection in the dark window, barely recognizing the person staring back. Who are you, really? Not the roles you play, not the titles you carry, but the person at your core. What do you want? What do you need? In that moment, it hits you. A quiet realization, almost like a whisper you hadn't noticed before, but now it's clear. You don't need more noise. You don't need more distractions. You don't need to keep pushing, chasing, or filling the empty space with everything around you. You need solitude. The thought is almost foreign to you. Solitude. At first, it seems terrifying, even lonely. But then you remember the last time you were alone, truly alone. The moments when you could hear your own thoughts, the times when the world slowed down enough for you to breathe, to think, to simply be. You realize that it's not isolation you're afraid of, but what you might uncover when you're truly still. What you might discover if you stop running from your own reflection. You take a deep breath. It's time. Time to reclaim yourself. Time to step away from the chaos. Time to listen to the quiet, the silence that holds the answers you've been searching for. This is your invitation to step into the journey of solitude, the journey within. A path that leads you back to yourself, where you'll find the strength, the clarity, and the peace that you've been longing for. The next chapters you're about to embark on aren't just about being alone. They're about becoming whole. They're about learning to reconnect with the parts of you that have been lost in the noise. And as you listen, you'll realize that solitude isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. Something that will guide you towards deeper self-awareness and true inner strength. So as you begin this journey, I invite you to let go of the distractions, the worries, and the obligations that have been weighing you down. Close your eyes, take a moment to breathe, and allow yourself to step into the space of solitude. Here, in the quiet, you'll find the courage to reconnect with the most important person in your life, yourself. This is your journey. Welcome to the path within. Chapter 1. The Myth of Isolation. Lena sat at the crowded cafe, a warm latte clasped between her hands. The chatter around her buzzed like background music, voices rising and falling, phones chiming with notifications, friends laughing and scrolling through their feeds. It was the weekend, and she was surrounded by people. Yet somehow, she felt completely alone. She glanced at the screen of her phone. Another message notification. Another like on her recent post. A comment from a friend who lived miles away. Social media was buzzing with activity, but in the quiet spaces between the notifications, Lena felt something she couldn't ignore. Emptiness. She looked up from her phone and scanned the room, her gaze drifting over the smiling faces around her. Everyone was engaged in conversations, but none of them felt real. She was present physically, but emotionally, she was on the outside, looking in. The more she scrolled through her feed, the more she felt disconnected. She had hundreds of friends, thousands of followers. But was she truly seen by any of them? Or was she just a small blip in the never-ending stream of online personas? Her mind wandered, tracing back through the past few months. The countless gatherings, the parties, the dinners, the virtual meetups. She was constantly surrounded by people, and yet each interaction felt more and more shallow. When was the last time she had a conversation that went beyond the surface? When did she last feel truly connected to someone? She'd been told that relationships, whether online or in person, were supposed to fill the void. But lately, they just seemed to deepen the ache inside. Lena took a deep breath and shifted her focus to the bustling street outside the cafe window. The world was moving in fast forward, and she felt stuck in slow motion. She watched people pass by, laughing with friends, walking their dogs, lost in their own worlds. Everyone seemed to be moving, engaging, connecting, except her. The truth was, Lena had been hiding in plain sight for years. She thought being constantly surrounded by people would fill the emptiness, but it didn't. The noise, the distractions, the endless scrolling, none of it led to connection. It was all a facade, a way to avoid the deeper question that gnawed at her soul. Who was she really, beyond the mask of social media posts and group selfies? As she sat there, sipping her latte, a thought started to take root. It wasn't that she was truly isolated. It was that she was disconnected from herself, from her own needs, desires, and emotions. She had surrounded herself with external noise, thinking that would drown out the loneliness she felt inside. But it hadn't worked. In fact, the more she filled her life with distractions, the more distant she became from her true self. Then a soft, almost imperceptible shift occurred in her mind. What if the loneliness she felt wasn't a result of being alone, but rather a result of never allowing herself to be alone? What if the true answer wasn't more people, more likes, more attention, but solitude? Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had always thought that solitude was a form of isolation, a dangerous space where you risked becoming forgotten, abandoned, or invisible. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that solitude could be the exact opposite. It could be the very thing that helped her reconnect with the parts of herself she'd lost in the noise of constant social interaction. The idea was scary, but in an exhilarating way. Solitude wasn't a void to be feared. It was a space to be embraced. The kind of space where she could stop pretending, stop performing, and just be herself. A place where she could hear her own thoughts without the constant interruption of outside opinions. A place where she could find clarity in the silence. Lena leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the idea of solitude sink in. She didn't have to be surrounded by people to be whole. She didn't have to rely on the validation of others to feel valued. In fact, it was the opposite. By learning to embrace solitude, she could build a more authentic connection, not just with herself, but with the people who truly mattered in her life. Now, I want you to think about your own relationships. Are they meaningful connections, or have they become distractions from what's truly important? How often do you find yourself in the company of others, yet still feel a sense of emptiness, of disconnection? Do you rely on constant social interaction to avoid the discomfort of being alone with your thoughts? Take a moment to reflect. Is there a part of you that longs for the kind of solitude that doesn't isolate you, but instead helps you reconnect with your own truth? This chapter isn't just Lena's story. It's a reflection of many of us. We live in a world where we're constantly encouraged to be with others, to fill our time with activities, to keep busy. But sometimes, the most profound connections happen when we step away from the noise and spend time with the one person who truly matters, ourselves. So, as you continue on this journey, think about how you might begin to embrace the space of solitude, not as something that separates you from the world, but as something that brings you closer to your authentic self. The myth of isolation is not being alone. It's not being truly present with who you are. This is the beginning of your transformation. Chapter 2, Embracing the Uncomfortable. Emma stared out of the small wooden cabin window, the vast expanse of wilderness stretching out before her. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hills, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. It was beautiful, serene even. Yet there was something in her chest that felt tight, something unsettling. She had come on this retreat to escape the noise, to step away from the relentless pace of her life, to finally face the one thing she had been avoiding for years, being alone. And now, standing here, she realized how truly terrified she was. At first, she thought it would be easy. A weekend of peace and quiet in nature, no phone, no social media, no obligations. A chance to reconnect with herself. It sounded perfect in theory. But now, with the retreat center's silence wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket, Emma felt her breath quicken. She had always surrounded herself with people, always kept her schedule packed, always made sure there was noise around her. Being alone wasn't just uncomfortable. It was terrifying. It made her feel exposed, like there was nowhere to hide from the thoughts and emotions she had been running from for years. As she sat on the edge of her bed, her mind started to race. What was she supposed to do now? She couldn't just sit here alone with her thoughts. Could she? Every minute felt like an eternity. The sound of her own breath seemed too loud, and the silence in the cabin too heavy. Her mind kept replaying memories of past mistakes, moments of failure, regrets she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. They came rushing at her all at once. Too much, too fast. She stood up abruptly and began pacing the room. There was no escape. No one to distract her. No conversation to pull her attention away from the mess of emotions that now seemed to take up every inch of space in her mind. The discomfort was unbearable. Emma tried to calm herself, taking deep breaths, but it didn't help. The silence felt oppressive. She hated it. She wanted to run. She wanted to call someone, anyone, to fill the space and make it go away. Anything to avoid this feeling, this discomfort. But something inside her, some quiet voice, deep within, was urging her to stay, to lean into the unease rather than retreat from it. So she did. She allowed herself to sit down again, closed her eyes, and just felt. The minutes stretched on, and at first the discomfort felt like it might swallow her whole. But as she sat there without any distractions, without anyone else to focus on, something slowly started to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it certainly wasn't easy. But the longer she stayed in the silence, the more she realized that this discomfort wasn't an enemy. It wasn't something to run from. It was a messenger. It was a signpost, pointing her toward the healing and growth she had been avoiding for so long. The discomfort was there because she was confronting parts of herself she had spent years suppressing. Parts of her that had been buried under layers of busyness and noise. Parts of her that had been left in the dark, waiting for the moment she was finally ready to face them. It was hard. It was uncomfortable. But with each breath, she started to realize that the discomfort itself was a form of healing. By sitting with her feelings, by allowing herself to simply be with them rather than running away, she was starting to process emotions she hadn't given herself permission to feel before. Anger, sadness, grief, but also joy, relief, and peace. They were all there, in that space of solitude, waiting for her to acknowledge them. By the end of the evening, Emma felt a shift. The initial panic had subsided, and though she still felt unsettled, she had a new sense of clarity. The discomfort had transformed into something manageable. And even more surprising, it had become a doorway to deeper understanding, a path toward healing. Now, take a moment to think about your own experiences with discomfort. When was the last time you found yourself alone, really alone, without distractions, and felt that same sense of unease? What was it like for you? How did you respond? Did you try to avoid it? Or did you push through and face it? Think about the discomfort itself. What might it be trying to teach you? Can you recall a time when facing your discomfort led to growth or change? Perhaps it was a tough situation that at the time felt overwhelming, but when you looked back, you saw how it helped you become stronger, more resilient, or more self-aware. I invite you now to reflect on that moment. If you can, close your eyes and relive it. Allow yourself to feel that discomfort again, not as a burden, but as an opportunity. Because just like Emma, you may find that embracing the discomfort is the very thing that leads you to your own healing and transformation. This journey we're on together requires us to be brave, to face what's uncomfortable, but it's through this courage that we discover the power within ourselves. Let the discomfort become your ally. Lean into it, and let it show you what's waiting for you on the other side. Chapter 3, The Power of Presence. The day began like any other for Jake. His phone buzzed with reminders of meetings, calls, and deadlines. The list was endless. Appointments, errands, emails. His mind raced to keep up with the whirlwind of tasks. The hum of activity had become the soundtrack of his life. But today, something was different. Something had shifted without warning. The call came mid-morning. It was his boss, the one person whose every word Jake had learned to hang on to, whose expectations were his constant companion. But this time, it wasn't the usual update or instructions. It was news that rattled him to his core. He was being let go. The company had to downsize. His job, the one thing that had anchored him in this chaotic world, was gone. In the days that followed, everything seemed to spiral. The routines, the structure, the predictable chaos, gone in an instant. He found himself alone in his apartment, staring at the piles of things that once held meaning. Clothes for work, his briefcase, old emails, and endless spreadsheets. Jake hated this feeling of uncertainty, of emptiness. The silence of his apartment felt oppressive. For the first time in years, he was forced into solitude, without the noise of deadlines or the constant chatter of his colleagues. At first, he filled the space with distractions: social media, TV, texts, calls. Anything to avoid confronting the reality of what he was feeling. But as the days passed, the distractions became less effective. The urge to fill the silence with anything other than his own thoughts grew weaker. It was in these quiet moments that something began to shift. He began to notice the small things around him, the sunlight pouring through the window in the morning, the way the shadows danced on the walls, the sound of birds outside. At first, these things seemed insignificant, like background noise to his life. But now, they held a quiet presence that he hadn't given attention to before. It wasn't immediate. The discomfort of being alone, of not having anything to do, gnawed at him. There were moments of anxiety, moments where he questioned his worth, his purpose. Was he still valuable without his job? Who was he, really, when everything he had identified with was suddenly gone? But then, one afternoon, as he sat by the window with a cup of coffee, he made a choice. He put down his phone. He let the thoughts come and go without judgment. He didn't try to push them away, but simply watched them as they drifted in and out like clouds in the sky. He focused on the sound of his breath, the feeling of the warm mug in his hands, the texture of the chair beneath him. In that moment, something miraculous happened. The noise inside his head quieted, and the stillness around him began to feel peaceful. For the first time in what felt like years, Jake was fully present. He wasn't thinking about his job, his past, or what the future might bring. He was just here. In that moment, with nothing to do but simply be. The experience didn't last forever, but it was a moment of clarity. Jake began to realize that solitude wasn't just about being physically alone. It was about being fully present. He started to look at the world around him differently. The trees outside his window weren't just trees anymore. They were living, breathing entities, standing tall and strong, unaffected by the rush of time. The sound of birds chirping wasn't just background noise. It was life, happening in the here and now. Solitude, he discovered, wasn't the enemy he had once feared. It wasn't something to run from, something that left him feeling isolated or abandoned. Solitude, when embraced, became a powerful tool. It became a space where he could connect with the present moment, where he could truly be, and in that presence, he found peace, clarity, a deeper understanding of himself. Now, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to experience the power of presence for yourself. Wherever you are right now, find a comfortable position. Sit down or stand still, and take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for a moment. Now slowly exhale, releasing any tension in your body. As you breathe, allow yourself to become aware of your surroundings. Notice the sounds around you, the hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the sound of your own breath. Notice the feeling of the air on your skin, the ground beneath your feet, the weight of your body. Take a moment to just be. No need to rush, no need to do anything. Simply observe. The thoughts that come and go, acknowledge them, but don't hold on to them. Let them pass like clouds in the sky. In this moment, there is no past, no future. There is only now. Feel the power of being fully present in this space, in this moment. As you sit in this stillness, what do you notice? What feelings arise? What thoughts come to the surface? Are there any areas of your life where you've been rushing, constantly looking ahead, not giving yourself permission to simply be? Remember, the power of presence is always available to you. It doesn't require any special skill or talent. It only requires you to be here in this moment. Embrace it and know that in your solitude, there is strength. Chapter 4, Finding Strength in Stillness. Maya had always been on the go. From the moment she woke up, her mind was in motion, rushing through the list of tasks she had to accomplish, meeting deadlines, juggling commitments. She was the type of person who measured her worth by how much she could get done. The more tasks she checked off, the more valuable she felt. Busyness was her badge of honor. She found comfort in the noise of life, The hum of her to-do list, the constant stream of emails, the rush of phone calls, these were her anchors. In her mind, if she wasn't moving, she wasn't doing enough. There was always something else that needed attention. To be still was to be unproductive, and that, to her, felt like failure. But lately, something had been nagging at her. There were moments when the noise would subside, when the hustle of the day would come to an unexpected halt. In those moments, Maya would feel a sense of discomfort, almost like a physical ache. Her mind would race, searching for something to fill the void. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't relax. If she wasn't moving, then what was she? And why did it feel so wrong? It wasn't until Maya took a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the mountains that things began to shift. She had reluctantly agreed to take the weekend off, promising herself that she would catch up on work as soon as she returned. But as soon as she arrived at the cabin, the silence hit her. There were no phone calls, no emails, no people rushing in and out. Just the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, the occasional chirp of birds, and the gentle creak of the wooden floors beneath her feet. At first, Maya was uncomfortable. She paced around the cabin, unsure of what to do with herself. She opened her laptop several times, but quickly closed it, knowing that it wasn't the reason she was here. She tried reading, but her mind kept wandering back to the things she should be doing. The minutes felt like hours. She didn't know how to simply be. But as the day wore on, something began to happen. Slowly, her restlessness faded. She found herself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink. She noticed the stillness of the lake, how the water reflected the mountains in perfect symmetry. In that moment, she felt at peace. The longer she sat, the more she realized that the stillness wasn't a weakness, as she had always believed. It wasn't something to fear. It was, in fact, a source of power. The calm allowed her mind to settle, to think more clearly. Without the constant pressure of rushing, she could hear her own thoughts more clearly. She began to reflect on her life, her goals, and what truly mattered to her. The frantic pace she had been living no longer seemed necessary. In the quiet, she discovered a sense of clarity and insight that she had been missing in the noise of her everyday life. It was in those moments of stillness that Maya began to reconnect with herself. She found strength in the pauses, in the gaps between the hustle. She realized that stillness was not synonymous with weakness. It was in those quiet spaces that her creativity flourished, where new ideas emerged, and where she recharged in ways she hadn't known were possible. Maya had spent years running from stillness, believing it made her weak. But now, she saw it differently. Stillness was a tool, a powerful one. It allowed her to reflect, to rejuvenate, and to reconnect with the most important person in her life, herself. Now, I'd like to invite you to take a moment and reflect on your own experience with stillness. Think about a time when you were forced to slow down, whether by choice or circumstance. Maybe it was during a quiet walk in nature, a moment of solitude at home, or a break from your usual routine. What did you feel in that moment of stillness? Were you uncomfortable at first, like Maya, or did you find a sense of peace and clarity right away? Take a deep breath and close your eyes if you can. Think back to that time when you allowed yourself to just be. In those moments, did you feel a sense of empowerment, creativity, or inspiration? Perhaps you felt more connected to yourself or more in tune with the world around you. Now, think about how you can bring more moments of stillness into your life. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. Sometimes, just a few minutes of quiet can help reset your mind. Can you find a space in your day where you can pause and just be? Maybe during your morning coffee, or on your lunch break, or before bed. Stillness isn't something to fear. It's a powerful tool for reflection, rejuvenation, and reconnection. Embrace it and see what new strength it brings into your life. Chapter 5, Solitude as a Catalyst for Creativity. For years, Lucas, a writer, had found himself facing the blank page. He sat at his desk day after day, pen in hand, waiting for the flow of words to come. But the words never did. His mind was clouded, his thoughts fragmented. He tried everything, writing prompts, brainstorming sessions, and forcing himself into long, unbroken writing hours. But nothing seemed to work. The harder he tried, the more elusive the ideas became. It wasn't just the writing that felt stuck. His life, in general, felt like it was in a holding pattern. He was busy, yes, always surrounded by people, his friends, his editor, his publisher, his fans, but something was missing. There was a growing sense of frustration gnawing at him, like he was trying to build something without the right materials. The noise of the world, the constant demands and distractions, made it almost impossible for him to hear his own inner voice, the one that told him the stories he longed to tell. Then one day, Lucas decided to take a break. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was the endless cycle of creative frustration that drove him to the edge, or maybe it was just an intuitive pull to step away from everything. Whatever the reason, he booked a cabin in the mountains for a week, hoping for some peace and quiet. He was hesitant at first, unsure of what he was looking for. He didn't know if solitude would help him find the answers, but he knew he had to try something different. The first day in the cabin was nothing short of uncomfortable. At first, he tried to force himself to write, but there was no inspiration. The silence in the cabin felt overwhelming. He was so used to the background noise of city life, the hum of traffic, the chatter of people, the click-clack of his laptop, that being alone with his thoughts felt foreign, almost unnerving. The walls seemed to close in, and the quiet made him acutely aware of the emptiness in his mind. But something shifted on the second day. Lucas woke up early to the sound of birds chirping outside, and he took a long walk through the nearby forest. The air was crisp, the sunlight dappled through the trees, and for the first time in what felt like years, he wasn't rushing anywhere. As he walked, he let his mind wander. At first, his thoughts were scattered. Concerns about deadlines, unfinished chapters, the pressure to succeed. But as he kept walking, something changed. The rhythm of his steps, the silence around him, and the sheer vastness of nature seemed to clear his mind. By the time he returned to the cabin, something had unlocked within him. It wasn't that he had found the perfect plot twist or discovered a brilliant new character, at least not yet. But the silence had allowed his imagination to stir. It was like his mind had been given the space to breathe, to move freely without the constraints of the world around him. Over the next few days, Lucas immersed himself in the quiet, allowing his creativity to rise to the surface. Without the distractions of phone calls, emails, or social media, he began to rediscover what he loved about storytelling. The exploration of ideas, the playfulness with words, the joy of creating worlds from nothing. He found that in the stillness, his ideas flowed more freely, and his writing began to take on a new life. There were no outside expectations, no pressure to please anyone, just him and his words. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Lucas finally sat down at his desk and began to write. This time, the words came easily. They flowed like a river that had been dammed for too long, each sentence carrying him further into the story. By the end of the week, he had written more than he had in months, and the creative block he had felt for so long seemed like a distant memory. Solitude, he realized, was not a curse. It was a gift. In the absence of distractions, he had reconnected with his own creative spirit. He had given himself permission to be quiet, to think deeply, to imagine freely. In the solitude of the cabin, Lucas had found his muse again. Now, let's take a moment to think about your own creative journey. Whether you're a writer, an artist, or someone who has a project or idea you've been nurturing, I'd like you to reflect on a time when you felt truly inspired. Was there a moment when you felt like you were tapping into something deeper, something that felt like your truest creative self? Maybe it was a time when you were working on a project and ideas seemed to flow effortlessly. Or perhaps it was during a quiet moment of reflection when the world around you was calm and you could hear your own thoughts clearly. Think about what conditions helped bring that creative energy to life. Was it solitude? Was it silence? Or was it simply giving yourself permission to explore without judgment? Now, imagine if you could carve out time for solitude and creative exploration in your life. What might happen if you set aside time to just be with your ideas without the pressure to rush or produce? What would it feel like to allow your creativity to grow at its own pace without the distractions that usually fill your day? Take a moment now to commit to giving yourself the space to be creative. Maybe it's dedicating a quiet hour each day, or perhaps planning a day where you can step away from the noise of your usual routine. Trust that in this space of solitude, your creativity will find room to bloom. You might just surprise yourself with what you can create when you allow yourself the freedom to explore. Chapter 6: Solitude and Self-Love. Emma had always been the kind of person who thrived on external validation. From a young age, she learned to seek approval in everything she did, whether it was through academic achievements, her social media presence, or the constant need for compliments from friends and colleagues. The rush of being praised, the validation of being liked, and the feeling of being seen was what made her feel worthy. Yet, beneath all the smiles and affirmations, there was a gnawing emptiness, a quiet voice that whispered that something was missing. She didn't know how to give herself that same love and approval that she so eagerly sought from others. As an adult, Emma's need for external validation grew. Every photo posted online was meticulously crafted, every success shared and celebrated, and every piece of feedback eagerly anticipated. The approval of others became the cornerstone of her self-esteem, and without it, she felt anxious, inadequate, and uncertain. On days when the compliments and praise didn't come, she questioned her worth, wondering if she had somehow failed. But one weekend, everything changed. Emma attended a retreat focused on mindfulness and personal growth. It was a last-minute decision, driven by a desire to escape the noise of her regular life. She hoped it would help her feel more centered, less dependent on the opinions of others. The retreat was held in a quiet cabin by a serene lake, surrounded by towering trees and the gentle hum of nature. At first, Emma resisted the idea of being alone. She had come there to connect with others, to engage in group activities and share her thoughts. Solitude, she thought, would only make her feel more lonely and exposed. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. The absence of external distractions, the lack of constant notifications, the absence of social media, and the minimal interaction with others allowed Emma to turn inward. She was left alone with her thoughts, her emotions, and, perhaps most importantly, herself. The first few days were challenging. Emma didn't know what to do with the stillness. She filled her time with books, writing, and reflection, but every so often, she'd find herself checking her phone, as if seeking the reassurance she was so accustomed to. But gradually, the pull of external validation began to fade. It was as though the longer she sat with herself, the less important the opinions of others seemed. She began to notice the small things, her breath, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the beauty of the world around her. And in that quiet, something remarkable happened. She started to listen to herself. As Emma spent more time in solitude, she began to see that the approval she had long sought from others was fleeting and unreliable. The praise of others could not define her worth. It could never fill the emptiness she often felt. What truly mattered was how she treated herself, the kindness she showed herself in moments of doubt, the way she cared for her body and mind, and the love she allowed herself to feel, free from the constraints of external judgment. One afternoon, as Emma sat by the lake, watching the water ripple in the soft breeze, she realized that self-love was not about perfection or constant validation. It was about accepting herself, flaws and all. She understood that she was enough, just as she was. The peace and quiet of solitude had given her the space to explore her own heart, to confront her insecurities, and to make peace with her imperfections. It was in these moments of solitude that Emma discovered the deepest form of love, self-love. When she returned home, Emma continued to nurture her newfound sense of self-worth. She still interacted with the world, still sought feedback from others, but now she understood that her value did not depend on it. She was learning to affirm herself, to celebrate her own achievements, and to be kind to herself in ways she had never been before. Now, let's take a moment to turn inward. I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with yourself. How much of your sense of worth comes from the opinions of others? How much of it comes from within? During moments of solitude, try practicing self-affirmation. Take a few deep breaths and allow yourself to acknowledge one thing you truly love about yourself. It could be something as simple as your creativity, your ability to empathize with others, your sense of humor, or the way you persevere through challenges. Whatever it is, sit with that feeling of self-appreciation. Feel the warmth of that acknowledgement settle in your heart. Allow it to fill you with the same comfort and joy you might seek from others. But this time, it's coming from within. Let this moment be a reminder that your worth is not determined by anyone else's approval. It's yours to claim, to nurture, and to celebrate. You are enough. And when you embrace that truth, you open the door to a deeper connection with yourself and a more authentic, fulfilling connection with the world around you. Chapter 7. The Fear of Being Alone. Sophia had always been terrified of being alone. The mere thought of solitude brought a chill to her spine, a sense of deep discomfort that she could never quite shake. From a young age, she had experienced abandonment. First, the loss of a parent, then a series of broken friendships that left her questioning her worth. The pain of being left behind, the haunting feeling that no one could truly be there for her, became the shadow that loomed over every moment of her life. It was no surprise that, as an adult, she found solace in distractions, in constant noise, and in the company of others. She could be surrounded by people, and yet feel deeply disconnected, as though she was always just a step away from the edge of loneliness. Sophia's fear of being alone had shaped her decisions, her relationships, and even her career. She couldn't be alone, not because she craved companionship, but because being alone meant confronting the very things she had tried to bury. The scars of abandonment, the feelings of unworthiness, and the unresolved grief that had been tucked away for years. Whenever she found herself in solitude, those wounds came rushing to the surface, threatening to overwhelm her. The isolation triggered memories of those painful moments, and her mind raced to distract itself through work, socializing, scrolling through her phone, anything to avoid facing the void that seemed to swallow her. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to fill the silence with activity, Sophia decided to attend a weekend retreat centered around self-healing. She was desperate for something, anything, to break the cycle of fear and anxiety that haunted her. The retreat, nestled in the mountains, promised solitude and reflection, but Sophia approached it with dread. The very thought of being alone with her emotions, without distractions, seemed like an insurmountable challenge. On the first day of the retreat, she struggled to settle in. The quiet felt suffocating, the stillness almost unbearable. Her mind raced with memories of abandonment, with the sound of doors closing and voices fading into the distance. She could hear her own breath, feel her heart pounding in her chest as if it were pleading for her to escape, to run back to the distractions she knew so well. But as the days passed, something shifted. There, in the isolation of the retreat, in the peace of the natural surroundings, Sophia began to confront the very thing she feared the most: her own past. The solitude was not just the absence of others. It was an invitation to confront the parts of herself she had been avoiding. The memories of abandonment no longer felt as distant as they once did. They were right there, within reach, begging to be acknowledged. At first, she resisted. But as she sat in silence, allowing the memories to surface without judgment, Sophia started to realize that her fear of being alone wasn't about solitude itself. It was about the pain she had never fully faced. Her fear wasn't just about loneliness. It was about confronting the past, the unresolved emotions that she had carried with her for years. Solitude, she came to understand, wasn't something to fear. It was the space in which healing could happen, the place where she could finally look at those wounds and allow them to heal. As she spent more time in the retreat's peaceful environment, Sophia began to engage with the emotions she had been avoiding. She allowed herself to feel the hurt, the sadness, and the anger, without running away, without burying them under layers of busyness or distractions. Slowly, those emotions began to lose their grip on her. The more she embraced the solitude, the more she realized that being alone didn't have to mean being abandoned. It meant being whole, being present with herself, and reclaiming the pieces of herself she had lost along the way. On the final day of the retreat, Sophia sat by the edge of the lake, the morning sun casting a golden glow across the water. She felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The fear of being alone no longer held power over her. In fact, she now welcomed solitude as a companion in her healing journey. It had given her the space to confront her past, to forgive herself for the wounds she had carried, and to embrace her own strength. She wasn't alone. She was whole, and in that wholeness, she found freedom. Now I invite you to reflect on your own relationship with solitude. Have there been moments in your life when you feared being alone? What emotions arise when you think about being by yourself, whether it's for a short time or longer periods? Do those feelings feel familiar? Are they tied to past experiences or unresolved emotions? Take a few moments to sit quietly and allow those thoughts and feelings to surface. It's okay to feel discomfort. It's a natural part of the healing process. But know that, just like Sophia, you have the strength to face these emotions. Solitude can be a safe and supportive space for you to reflect, heal, and reconnect with your inner self. If you're ready, consider gently confronting these fears. Remember, you are not alone in this journey. Embrace the solitude as a space for healing, and trust that in time, you will emerge stronger and more self-aware, just as Sophia did. Chapter 8, Redefining Relationships Through Solitude. Amira was always the life of the party. Outgoing, social, and always surrounded by friends and family. She prided herself on being available to everyone, constantly putting others' needs before her own. To her, relationships were the foundation of her life. She believed that in order to be loved, she had to be everything to everyone, adjusting herself to fit the needs and expectations of others. The thought of being alone, of stepping back to focus on herself, felt like a betrayal to the relationships she held dear. She feared that embracing solitude would push people away, and that the bonds she'd worked so hard to cultivate would dissolve into thin air. One day, Amira reached a point where the constant pressure of being everything to everyone began to weigh her down. She felt like a version of herself she didn't fully recognize. Performing roles she didn't know how to escape. The friendships, the family gatherings, and the endless interactions had become exhausting, but she felt like she couldn't stop. Every time she tried to take a step back, the guilt would creep in. What if people thought she didn't care? What if they saw her as selfish for needing space? The turning point came unexpectedly when Amira went on a solo trip to the mountains. Initially, the idea of being alone terrified her. She was used to filling her time with others, and the quiet of the mountains seemed like an alien environment. But as the days passed, and she found herself alone in the tranquility of nature, something began to shift. At first, she struggled to settle into the stillness. Her mind raced with the what-ifs. What if people thought she was abandoning them? What if they saw her absence as a sign of disinterest? But as she sat by the river, taking in the vastness of the landscape, a new sense of clarity began to emerge. In the solitude, Amira finally had the space to listen to herself. Without the constant noise of other people's opinions or the demands of keeping up with everyone else, she could hear her own thoughts clearly. She began to realize that, for years, she had been bending and shaping herself to meet the needs of others, often at the cost of her own desires and needs. The more she embraced the silence, the more she understood that her relationships had been based on a fragile foundation. They were built on pleasing others rather than on authenticity. Over time, Amira learned that true connection doesn't come from fitting into someone else's mold. It comes from being fully herself, unapologetically and genuinely. Her relationships, she realized, weren't as fragile as she had once thought. In fact, they could be stronger than ever if they were rooted in authenticity, trust, and mutual respect. Solitude had given her the chance to rediscover her own identity and understand what she truly wanted from her connections with others. When Amira returned from the trip, she was a different person, not because she had changed in the way others might have expected, but because she had become more of who she truly was. She no longer feared being alone or feared losing her relationships. Instead, she found that her connections with others had deepened in ways she never imagined. She was no longer afraid to express her true self, and in doing so, her relationships became richer and more meaningful. She was no longer seeking validation from others or trying to please everyone. Instead, she was creating space for honest, vulnerable, and authentic interactions. Amira's newfound sense of self allowed her to nurture relationships that were based on mutual understanding and respect. She discovered that being comfortable with herself, embracing her own solitude, made her a better friend, partner, and family member. She didn't have to lose herself in the process of connecting with others. In fact, she learned that the more she embraced her own identity, the stronger and more authentic her relationships became. Now, I invite you to reflect on your own relationships. Are there ways in which you might be shaping yourself to meet the expectations of others rather than being true to who you really are? What would it look like for you to be fully authentic in your relationships without the fear of judgment or rejection? Take a few moments to think about your closest relationships, whether with family, friends, or partners. How could they benefit from more authentic, self-aware interactions? Could your own sense of self-awareness strengthen the way you connect with others? In the coming days, try to practice being yourself, unapologetically, in your relationships. Embrace solitude as a tool for deepening your understanding of yourself. And from that place of self-awareness, allow your connections with others to flourish. Remember, the more authentic you are, the more powerful and meaningful your relationships will become. Chapter 9. The Road to Self-Discovery. The road to self-discovery is long, winding, and never quite the same for anyone. It's not a single event, but rather a continual unfolding of who we are, where we've been, and where we are heading. Solitude, in its most honest form, is a powerful tool for navigating that journey, providing us the space to listen to our inner voices and uncover the layers of our true selves. This chapter takes us into the lives of 3 different individuals at various stages of life, each of whom embarks on their own unique path to self-discovery through the gift of solitude. The young dreamer. Maya was 22 when she felt the weight of uncertainty settling in her chest. Fresh out of college, she was caught in the whirlwind of expectations. Her parents wanted her to settle into a stable job. Her friends seemed to have their lives all figured out. And yet, Maya felt lost in the noise. She couldn't seem to find a path that resonated with her soul. On the surface, everything was fine, but inside, there was a persistent longing for something more. One evening, after a particularly stressful day filled with well-meaning advice from her family and friends, Maya decided to take a walk by the lake, alone. The stillness of the night surrounded her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of relief. Sitting by the water, the only sound being the gentle lapping of the waves, Maya allowed herself to truly pause and listen. As the moonlight glimmered across the lake, she realized something profound. She had always loved art, but in the rush to meet everyone's expectations, she had forgotten to nurture that part of herself. Maya had always been a painter, but over time she had stopped picking up a brush, convincing herself it was impractical. In the solitude of that moment, she rediscovered her passion and made a vow to herself to make room for creativity in her life. She began painting again, not for an audience or for validation, but for herself. What started as a hobby soon grew into a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Solitude, for Maya, was the key to uncovering the passion she had buried beneath the pressures of life. It had given her the clarity to hear her true calling. The middle-aged reconnector, David, in his 40s, had spent most of his life running on an autopilot. He had built a career, raised a family, and met all the societal markers of success. But in the quiet of his midlife, he felt a sense of emptiness creeping in. After years of being constantly surrounded by the noise of family obligations, work deadlines, and social events, David found himself at a crossroads. His life had been full of accomplishments. Yet he realized that he had lost touch with the simple joys that once made his heart sing. One weekend, David decided to spend some time away from the chaos of his daily routine. He took a solo trip to a cabin in the mountains. At first, he was restless. His mind was cluttered with thoughts of work, family, and everything he should be doing. But as the days went on, the peace of solitude started to work its magic. He rediscovered his love for hiking, a passion he had set aside for years. The simple act of walking through the woods, surrounded by the beauty of nature, brought back memories of his younger years, years filled with joy and freedom. Through solitude, David found a renewed sense of appreciation for the small moments of life. He realized that the joy he had once felt, the deep fulfillment in simple things, had been drowned out by his busy lifestyle. Solitude gave him the opportunity to reconnect with his inner self and rediscover the happiness he had lost in the rush of life. The older seeker, Margaret, in her 70s, had lived a full life. She had raised children, built a career, and experienced the highs and lows of a long and varied journey. Yet, there were still pieces of herself that she felt she had never fully explored. After her children had grown and moved away, and after her retirement, Margaret found herself in a place of deep reflection. The years had been filled with external focus, on others, on responsibilities, but now, in her later years, she found herself in the quiet space of her own company. At first, Margaret felt a sense of loss, as though time had passed her by without her truly living for herself. She had always put others' needs first, and in doing so, had lost sight of her own desires and dreams. Solitude, however, became her teacher. It was in the long, peaceful afternoons spent alone with her thoughts that Margaret began to realize how much she had to offer the world, even in her older age. She started writing her memoirs, sharing the wisdom and stories of her life. She picked up old hobbies she had once enjoyed but abandoned, and began to take joy in the small things. A quiet afternoon in her garden, an evening spent reading. Margaret discovered that it was never too late to rediscover joy, to heal old wounds, or to explore the depths of her own soul. In solitude, she found new dimensions of herself that had remained hidden for years. Solitude, as we see, reveals different things to different people at different stages of life. For Maya, it was the discovery of her passion. For David, it was the rediscovery of joy. For Margaret, it was the healing of old wounds and the unveiling of new parts of herself. The journey to self-discovery is ongoing. It's not a destination, but a process that unfolds with each passing day, with each moment of stillness. Interactive element. As you reflect on your own journey, consider how solitude has helped you discover new things about yourself. Has there been a time when you uncovered a hidden passion or talent in the quiet? Or perhaps you've used solitude to heal or rediscover joy. Think about where you are in your own life and what you are currently learning about who you are. Are you on a path of rediscovery, healing, or new exploration? Solitude can be a powerful ally in this process, allowing you to uncover the facets of yourself that might otherwise remain hidden. Take some time to sit with these questions, embrace the silence, and see what it has to reveal to you. The road to self-discovery is one that continues to evolve. There is no end, only more layers to uncover. What will you discover about yourself today? Conclusion? The courage to be alone. As the journey through this audiobook comes to a close, take a deep breath. Reflect on the path you've walked, how far you've come from that initial sense of fear, discomfort, or confusion about being alone. You've spent time exploring solitude in its many forms, from the terrifying unknown to a newfound space of power and self-awareness. This is your transformation. The recognition that solitude isn't something to be feared but embraced, not just as a way to escape the world, but as a pathway to your truest self. Throughout this audiobook, we've uncovered that the act of being alone doesn't have to be a symbol of loneliness. Instead, it can be a powerful source of clarity, creativity, healing, and strength. Just as Maya found her art, David rediscovered joy, and Margaret unearthed hidden parts of herself. You too have the capacity to transform your relationship with solitude. The fear you once had of being alone, or the restlessness you felt in the quiet, has softened into a deeper understanding of the freedom solitude brings. It's a space where you can hear your own thoughts, heal old wounds, and unlock the doors to new possibilities. But the work doesn't end here. The shift from avoiding solitude to seeking it as a form of self-empowerment is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong pursuit. It's a continual dance between the noise of the world and the silence of your inner world. With each day, you have the opportunity to choose how you show up for yourself, how you lean into the stillness, and how you harness its strength. Remember, the journey of embracing solitude and finding peace within yourself is ongoing. It is not confined to the pages of this audiobook. It lives in each quiet moment, in each pause, in every time you allow yourself to simply be. You have already started this transformation, and now it's up to you to continue the practice, to nurture it, and to honor the space within you that yearns for connection with your truest self. Impactful ending. As you sit with this new understanding of solitude, take a moment to appreciate how far you've come. You've taken the courage to walk this path, and now it's time to make it your own. You are no longer afraid of silence, no longer hesitant to be with yourself. You've learned that solitude is not something that separates you from others, but something that brings you closer to the heart of who you are. In that stillness, you found power. And in that power, you found peace. This is just the beginning of your lifelong journey with solitude. The strength you've discovered in this space will continue to unfold as you carry it forward, shaping your experiences, relationships, and growth in ways you've yet to imagine. Interactive element. Before you go, take a moment to reflect on your own personal journey with solitude. Think back to the moments where you've embraced solitude, whether it was a moment of discomfort or a peaceful retreat. What have you learned about yourself in these moments? Now, set an intention for how you will continue to embrace and find strength in solitude moving forward. What is one action you can take today to integrate solitude into your life? Whether it's a few minutes of quiet reflection, a solo walk, or simply allowing yourself time to rest in silence, make a commitment to yourself that you will honor this relationship with solitude. Remember, solitude is not an absence of connection. It's a pathway to the most meaningful connection you can have with yourself. You've already begun this transformative process. Trust that each moment of solitude you embrace will continue to reveal more of who you are, more of your strength, and more of your potential. This journey isn't over, it's just beginning.